Woodstock, 1969. 400,000 people screaming. Jimi Hendrix was seconds away from the most iconic performance of his life. Then, someone in the crowd started screaming in a way that made Jimi stop everything. What happened in the next 10 minutes would haunt him until the day he died. It was August 18, 1969, early Monday morning at Max Yasgur's farm in Bethel, New York. The Woodstock Music Festival had been raging for 3 days straight, and most of the crowd had already left, but 40,000 die-hard fans remained, waiting through the night for one man, Jimi Hendrix. Jimi was exhausted. He'd been awake for nearly 72 hours, watching performance after performance, waiting for his slot. The festival organizers had scheduled him as the closing act, the grand finale, but technical delays and endless sets had pushed his performance to Monday morning around 9 a.m., when most people would normally be starting their workday. The crowd that remained was dedicated, almost desperate to see him. They'd slept in the mud, endured rain, survived on crackers and whatever food they could scrounge. Many of them were young men who'd narrowly avoided the draft. Others were soldiers on leave. Some had already been to Vietnam and come back changed. Among them was a 23-year-old named Michael Torres. He'd returned from Vietnam just 6 weeks earlier. The doctors at the VA hospital had diagnosed him with what they called combat fatigue, though the term PTSD wouldn't become common for another decade. Michael had been taking medication, but he'd stopped 3 days before Woodstock. He wanted to feel something again, even if it was just the music. Michael had positioned himself in the crowd about 50 yards from the stage, standing room only. He'd been there since Saturday afternoon, barely moving, barely eating. His friends had abandoned him hours ago, too exhausted to wait any longer. But Michael stayed. Something about Jimi's music spoke to the chaos in his mind. The distortion, the feedback, the way Jimi could make his guitar scream. It matched what Michael heard in his head every night. When Jimi finally walked onto that stage at 8:30 a.m., wearing a white leather jacket with blue beaded fringe, headband around his afro, the remaining crowd erupted. They'd waited all night for this moment. Jimi looked out at them, smiled that quiet smile of his, and picked up his white Stratocaster.
He started with Message to Love, and the crowd went wild. Then Hear My Train A-Comin', his fingers dancing across the fretboard with that supernatural fluidity that made other guitarists quit in frustration. Michael was transfixed. For the first time in weeks, the images in his head started to fade. All he could hear was the music. But then, Jimi began the opening notes of the Star-Spangled Banner. The moment that first distorted chord rang out, something inside Michael broke. The sound of the guitar suddenly wasn't music anymore. It was helicopter blades. It was mortar fire. It was the screaming of wounded men calling for medics. Jimi's famous use of feedback and distortion, the very techniques that made his performance legendary, became the soundtrack of Michael's nightmares. Michael's hands flew to his ears. He started screaming, not words, just pure animal terror. People around him stepped back, confused and frightened. Some thought he was high. Others thought he was having some kind of seizure. Nobody understood that in Michael's mind, he wasn't at Woodstock anymore. He was back in the jungle, watching his best friend die in his arms. He dropped to his knees in the mud, still screaming, his entire body shaking. A woman tried to help him, but he shoved her away violently, lost in his panic. A man tried to restrain him, thinking he was dangerous, but Michael fought back with the training the Marines had drilled into him. On stage, Jimi was in the middle of his most famous musical moment, bending the national anthem into a commentary on war, protest, and the American dream turned nightmare. His eyes were closed, lost in the music. The camera crews were filming, capturing what would become one of rock and roll's most iconic performances. But then he opened his eyes. From his elevated position on stage, Jimi could see something the cameras couldn't. About 50 yards back, people were forming a circle around something. Someone was on the ground, and even over the sound of his own amplifiers, even through the roar of the crowd, Jimmy heard a type of screaming that was different from the usual concert chaos.
It was the sound of someone drowning in their own mind. Jimmy stopped playing mid-note. His hand fell away from the guitar, letting it hang from his neck strap. The sudden silence was shocking. The crowd's cheering faltered, confused. The band behind him, thinking it was a planned pause, held their positions, but Jimmy wasn't thinking about the performance anymore. He'd heard that sound before. When Jimmy was in the Army, stationed at Fort Campbell with the 101st Airborne, he'd seen men come back from combat training exercises with that same terror in their voices. He'd held a fellow soldier once during a breakdown, not knowing what else to do except be there. That soldier had later died by his own hand, and Jimmy had carried that guilt for years, wondering if he could have done more. Now, standing on the biggest stage of his career, with cameras rolling and thousands watching, Jimmy made a decision that would have ended most performers. He took off his guitar and handed it to a stagehand. Then he jumped off the stage. The crowd gasped. The band stopped playing entirely. Jimmy's manager, standing backstage, started screaming, "What the hell is he doing?" But Jimmy ignored everyone. He pushed through the crowd, his white fringed jacket making him easy to follow as he moved toward the commotion. When he reached Michael, the young veteran was curled in the fetal position, hands over his ears, still screaming. His eyes were open but unseeing. Blood trickled from his palms, where his nails had dug into his own skin. The people around him had backed away, forming a wide circle, unsure what to do. Jimmy knelt down in the mud beside Michael. He didn't try to touch him. He knew better than that. Instead, he just sat there, cross-legged, and started humming quietly. Not a song anyone would recognize, just a low, gentle melody, barely audible over Michael's screams.
Slowly, impossibly slowly, the humming began to cut through Michael's panic. The young veteran's screaming started to break up, becoming sobs. His hands gradually lowered from his ears. His eyes began to focus. When Michael could finally see again, the first thing he saw was Jimi Hendrix sitting 2 feet away from him in the mud, still humming that gentle tune. "Hey, brother," Jimmy said softly, his voice carrying none of the authority of a rock star, just the quiet understanding of someone who'd seen darkness too. "You're not there anymore. You're here. You're safe." Michael's mouth opened, but no words came out. Tears were streaming down his face, mixing with the mud. "What's your name?" Jimmy asked, still speaking quietly, making no sudden movements. "Michael?" the young man managed to choke out. "Michael, I need you to breathe with me, okay? Can you do that?" Jimmy took a deep breath in, held it for 4 counts, let it out slowly. Michael tried to copy him, his breath hitching and stuttering, but gradually finding a rhythm. They sat there together for what felt like hours, but was probably only 3 or 4 minutes, just breathing together, while 40,000 people watched in absolute silence. The camera crews had stopped filming out of respect. The band waited on stage. The whole festival held its breath. When Michael's breathing had steadied, Jimmy spoke again. "You were over there, weren't you?" Michael nodded, unable to speak.
"My cousin didn't come back," Jimmy said quietly. "My friend from the Army shot himself last year. I see their faces sometimes when I close my eyes." He paused. "The music helps me, you know? Maybe it helps you too, when it doesn't sound like the war." "I'm sorry," Michael whispered, his first full sentence. "I ruined your show." Jimmy actually smiled at that, a sad, gentle smile. "Brother, you didn't ruin anything. You're the realest thing that's happened at this festival."
He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so Michael wouldn't be startled, and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "But I need you to do something for me, okay?" Michael nodded. "I need you to let some of these people help you get somewhere safe, get you some water, maybe some food. And when you're ready, when you feel steady enough, I want you to come backstage, because I'm going to finish this set, and I'm going to play it for you. Not for the cameras, not for the crowd, for you. Deal?" Michael's eyes widened. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," Jimi interrupted gently. "I want to." He looked up at the crowd around them. "Can I get some help here? This man needs water and a place to sit." Immediately, a dozen hands reached out. Someone produced a canteen. Someone else offered their jacket for Michael to sit on. The hostility and fear from moments ago had transformed into collective compassion. The crowd had witnessed something sacred, and they knew it. Jimi helped Michael to his feet, keeping a steadying hand on his arm. He walked him to the side of the crowd, where some festival medics had arrived. "Take care of him," Jimi told them, "and when he's ready, bring him backstage." Then Jimi walked back through the parted crowd, climbed back onto the stage, picked up his Stratocaster, and said into the microphone, "Sorry about that, folks. Had to check on a friend."
What happened next became the thing nobody talks about when they discuss Jimi's Woodstock performance. He didn't continue with the Star-Spangled Banner. Instead, he started playing Little Wing, one of his most gentle, beautiful songs. The aggression was gone. The angry distortion had softened. He played it slower than usual, almost like a lullaby, and his voice when he sang carried a tenderness most of the crowd had never heard from him before. Well, she's walking through the clouds with a circus mind that's running wild. Butterflies and zebras and moonbeams and fairy tales. As he played, Jimi's eyes kept drifting to where Michael sat on the side, wrapped in someone's blanket, drinking water, still shaking but present. And Michael, despite everything, was listening. After Little Wing, Jimi played Villanova Junction, an instrumental that felt like a prayer. Then Hey Joe, but stripped of its usual swagger, played almost mournfully. Every song choice was deliberate, carefully selected to bring peace instead of chaos, healing instead of excitement. The crowd, exhausted from 3 days of festival, swaying in the morning sun, received the music like a benediction. Many sat down in the mud. Some lay back and closed their eyes. A few cried, though they couldn't explain why. The aggressive rock and roll show they'd expected had transformed into something else entirely, something almost spiritual. After 45 minutes of this reimagined set, Jimi played his final song. He leaned into the microphone and said, "This one's for everyone who came home carrying something too heavy to put down." He launched into The Wind Cries Mary, and as he sang about the wind crying a name, crying for pain, crying for lost love and lost innocence, something broke open in that field. Veterans in the crowd who'd been holding themselves together started weeping openly. Their girlfriends and friends held them. Complete strangers put their arms around each other.
When the last note faded, Jimi didn't bow or wave or milk the applause. He simply put down his guitar, said "Peace and love, people," and walked off stage. Backstage, he went directly to where Michael was sitting with the medics. The young veteran stood up shakily, and before he could say anything, Jimi pulled him into a hug. "Thank you," Jimi said quietly, so only Michael could hear. "You reminded me why I do this, not for the show, for the healing." Michael broke down crying again, but this time it was different. This time it was relief, the kind of crying that comes when someone finally understands. They talked for 2 hours backstage while the festival grounds emptied. Jimi gave Michael his personal phone number, made him promise to call. He connected him with a doctor he knew who specialized in helping veterans. He didn't just offer help, he made sure it happened. Over the next year, Jimi called Michael every few weeks to check in. When Michael started having nightmares again, Jimi sent him tapes of himself playing acoustic guitar, gentle instrumentals designed to soothe rather than excite. When Michael finally felt ready to try therapy, Jimi paid for it anonymously through his management company. Michael Torres survived. He got better slowly, with setbacks and struggles, but he got better. He became a counselor himself, working with other veterans, and he never stopped telling people about the morning Jimi Hendrix stopped the biggest show of his career because one person needed help more than 40,000 people needed entertainment. Jimi died just over a year after Woodstock on September 18, 1970. Michael was devastated. He flew to Seattle for the funeral, though he stayed in the back, just another face in the crowd of thousands. But years later, when Jimi's personal effects were being cataloged, they found a notebook among his things. In it, dated August 19, 1969, the day after Woodstock, Jimi had written, "Met a brother named Michael yesterday. He was drowning, and I threw him a rope made of music. Or maybe he threw me one, not sure anymore. But I know this, everything I've done, every stage I've played, was worth it for that 10 minutes in the mud. That's what it's all about. Not the cameras, not the fame, just one person at a time, trying to survive together."
The Woodstock documentary that came out the following year included Jimi's Star-Spangled Banner performance, and it made him even more famous. But they cut out the part where he stopped playing. They cut out Michael. They edited the set to make it look continuous, polished, perfect. Only the people who were there that morning know the truth, that the greatest thing Jimi Hendrix did at Woodstock wasn't his guitar playing. It was remembering that behind every screaming face in every crowd is a human being who might be drowning in ways nobody can see. Michael Torres is 77 years old now. He still has Jimi's phone number written on a piece of paper in his wallet, even though that number has been disconnected for over 50 years. He still plays those acoustic tapes Jimi sent him when he can't sleep, and he still tells anyone who will listen about the day the greatest guitarist in the world jumped off a stage and sat in the mud with a stranger because one person's pain mattered more than 400,000 people's entertainment. That's Jimi's real legacy, not the guitar solos, not the showmanship, the humanity. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more untold stories about the hearts behind music's greatest legends.